Great. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody that's just joined us from the waiting room. So my name's Helen. I'm a careers consultant at Newcastle University's Careers Service. This is the second in our series of science careers outside the lab events that's taking place this week from Monday to Thursday. So I'd just like to wish everyone a really warm welcome for our business and finance session. Before we get started and get into the session proper, just a couple of housekeeping things just for you all to be aware of. So firstly, we are recording this session, so just to let you know that if you don't wish to appear in the recording, just please ensure that your camera is turned off throughout the session. Now, this is your opportunity to ask questions to our panelists, so please do, if you have questions for our panelists, write them in the chat box throughout the session. Equally, at the end of the session, you'll be able to unmute yourselves if you prefer to ask your own question rather than writing in the chat box as well. We will start the session really with sort of 5-minute introductions from all of our panelists, and then the remainder of the session will be Q&A. So just a chance to kind of ask questions for any of our panelists about working in business and finance when you come from a science background. So here are today's panelists. So really delighted to say that we have 5 panelists joining us from a range of organisations for this afternoon's session. I'm not going to introduce them, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. This is the running order for our session, so we'll start with Alexander, who will introduce himself firstly and give us an overview of his career history to date, and then we'll move on to our other panelists. So without further ado, Alexander, if you're ready, I'll just stop sharing my slides and over to you.
Hi, I'm Alexander. I hope you can all hear me. If not, start complaining loudly. I studied biomedical sciences at University of Newcastle and graduated in 2015. While I was there, I did as many part-time jobs as I could possibly find, including quite a few in the lab. I thought I was going to love laboratory science. I didn't, I hated it. So I left university and messed around for about 18 months. Did an awful lot of work in the NHS in part-time roles and realized that I was bored out of my skull and I missed doing things with numbers. So I started applying for jobs in accountancy because that was the first thing that occurred to me. I didn't actually want to be an accountant, but I figured that accountants make money and I could probably get myself back to university that way. I didn't do any research at all. I came to this really badly prepared and I had no idea what I was doing. I knew nothing about accountancy whatsoever. I eventually discovered that there were accounting firms, didn't know anything about them. And then I discovered the National Audit Office, which again, I'd never heard of either. And I applied and somehow I got in. To this day, I still don't entirely know how. So since then, I have been studying for all of my accountancy exams for the National Audit Office. It's very possible you've never heard of the National Audit Office at all. I hadn't. And you will almost certainly have read a news story that was written or based on a report written by the NAO in the last 48 hours. Any story that you've heard about how much the government is grossly overspending or misspending on COVID, we probably wrote the report for it. Which all sounds very glamorous. It probably isn't. So since I started working with them, I've worked extensively on the aid budget, also quite a lot with environmental spending, a few other bits and pieces. As far as I know, I am the only person who has had mountain hours and camping hours count towards professional qualifications in accountancy, due to the sheer number of farm visits I've done, including sleeping overnight with no tent on a Lake District fell side during a 60-mile-an-hour gale. That was fun. I have worked with quite a few defence spending reviews. I have done some work with the Environmental Audit Commission to look at how we actually handle environmental land use in this country. And I'm now doing an audit of one of the strangest groups of pensioners in the world, which I'm happy to bore for England about if in the unusual event anyone actually wants me to. That's pretty much it, to be honest. I'm sure everyone, if anyone has any questions about what it was actually like qualifying as an accountant, and I'm sure plenty of other people here can tell you horror stories about exams, and we will only be too delighted to do so. But but I don't think I have anything else to say about me at this point. So I will hand over to whoever's next.
That's great. Thanks, Alexander. So yeah, don't worry, everyone. There'll be plenty of time for questions at the end of the session. So moving on next, we have a slightly more recent graduate. So I'm going to hand over to Abby Carr, who is working currently at PwC. So I'll hand over to you now, Abby.
Hi, so my name's Abby, and I graduated in the summer, and I did a master's in chemistry. So a couple of things that I did at uni, I did the design research scholarship, and I planned the third year medicinal lab course with Zuleika and Macmillan, and then I got an NCL Plus award from doing that. A couple of other things I did, I think I was a student ambassador, I was a peer mentor, and then I worked part-time as a waitress as well. And when I did my research project from fourth year, I was in the cancer research, and everyone really wanted me to do a PhD, and I really didn't like the lab work as well. I found it quite isolating, and because you're doing it all on your own, I'm quite a social person, so I just really wasn't enjoying it. And I guess, like Alex, I didn't really know anything about audit. I applied to lots of different roles in technology, a lot of maths-based roles, but it wasn't until someone in third year that didn't do a master's, he actually started working for KPMG, and I spoke to him, and he really sold me on the job. And so I applied to KPMG and didn't get through, but he then knew someone from PwC, and she really just sold it for me. I think the social aspect really appealed to me, and you work with lots of different people. So I applied and got the job. So I applied really, really late. I think I was the last person to be hired from Newcastle. Yeah, so I just started in September. I'm really enjoying it. I mean, so I'm now studying for the exams, which are really, really difficult, especially when you're working at the same time. But I guess doing a science degree, that does really prepare you for that. So yeah, so I'm doing pretty well. Kind of things I do, I'm just doing audit, so I look at lots of different jobs, and you get changed onto different jobs every couple of weeks. Right now I'm doing an audit for BP, the energy company. So yeah, so I think that's everything from me.
That's great, thanks, Abby. So moving on slightly now to somebody who sort of spent slightly longer in education and completed a PhD in addition to masters and undergraduate. So I'm going to hand over now to Hamid, who works for a company called Volak International Limited.
Thank you, Helen. My name is Hamid. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of how I ended up in my current position. So I'm a postgraduate in chemistry, organometallic, as you can imagine, completely laboratory based. So I graduated in 2012, and here I am 2021 as in a dairy and sports nutrition company in a customer facing role. I'm a quality technical customer manager. So I'll just give you an overview and sort of how I ended up in this position. So I guess the first question, what sort of, you might ask, if you're doing a PhD, surely you enjoy the lab work. And yes, I came into it because I liked the lab work, but I also liked the non-lab aspects of the job in terms of talking about my work in seminars, presenting my work, even simple things like non-lab based problem solving classes that we had, and sort of inter-university collaborations. I enjoyed that, so I came into the PhD with that sort of a mindset. But as I progressed through it, probably midway through it, I began to enjoy the non-lab aspect side of it more so, because I mean, I just felt those. Obviously, I enjoyed it, but also I saw better career prospects for me in that respect. So so when I finished, I started sort of looking for position sort of in that sort of a field. But it's worth mentioning my transition to a non-lab based role which I'm in now was not a complete one. So, so you've got to be sometimes realistic in these situations. So my initial role was as a senior scientist in a water chemistry field. So again, that's a chemical industry field, but it's more application based. So you're not doing R&D work, but instead you have products and you do sort of application based setting. But that was only, I would say, 30-40% of my job. And the rest of it was supporting salespeople in technical aspect, because when they go see existing customers or new prospects, they always need somebody with a technical know-how of the products, of the processes to support them. So I was doing quite a lot of that, as you can imagine, very customer facing. And the fun side is you get to do a lot of traveling, which is sort of what I did. I to America, to France, Holland, numerous occasions to the GCC countries, Qatar, Kuwait, and my role there was, because of my science background, I was able to really understand the products and understand them in depth, and over time be able to really sort of answer some deep technical questions. So as I sort of progressed through that role in the company, I started sort of taking on more and more important clients base and supporting the salespeople. And as you do work in any company, you sort of gain the trust of the sort of different stakeholders there. And when I was in my first job there, I sort of progressed from a senior scientist to a project manager, where my role moved even further away from the lab. So I was doing less applications work, and I still retained the customer training side, but I was leading the projects more. And again, projects that were not laboratory based projects, believe it or not, they were one of them was developing a technical website. So I worked a lot with software companies, from a sort of scientific aspect of it, try to get them to understand how our products are used by customers, because the website was ultimately used by customers. So as I did more and more of that, I really enjoyed it, I liked it, but I started to think, I wanted to do something more relevant and even more customer facing. So I started sort of looking at different position, and that's a couple of years ago. In fact, I came across this position in Volac International, which is a dairy / sort of sports nutrition company, and really sort of exciting position. Sort of came. I did a couple of rounds of interviews, and it's and the rest is sort of downhill from there. So I've been in this role for 2 years now. It's a very demanding role, but thoroughly enjoyable. The sort of things I do, it's really it's completely non-lab based. Any lab work that I do is in fact is testing sports nutrition products. So sort of taste sessions, sort of helping our marketing team in that sense. So I answer a lot of customer inquiries, be it complaints, simple or complex inquiries to do with things like what label claims they can use from our product from a regulatory and sort of technical perspective, how our products can be used. I oversee product specification sign off with big brands. So we have here sort of customers like I'm sure some people have heard the Bulk. A big sports brand where they use they sell high protein products to customers for protein shakes, things like that. So they're one of our customers. So yes, that's sort of a overview of my journey. It wasn't, like I said, straight transition from lab-based to non-lab-based, but it was over time. And I think my one big tip for everybody is, when you're looking for positions, don't just look at the title, because they could mean different things for different companies. So try to really understand what are the roles and responsibilities underneath that title, and try to see if that's a fit for you, and really just just take it from there.
That's great, thank you, Hamid. So our fourth speaker this afternoon, we are moving over to Alex Craig. Alex, you should be able to share your slides now.
Right. This could be a bit of a problem, couldn't it? Does anyone else share? Ah, share my screen.
Yeah. There should be an option to share your PowerPoint if you've got it open already.
That's the one, right. Much easier when it's not virtual. Can we all see the screen?
Yes, that looks good.
Just about. Okay, so I graduated from Newcastle in 2012, did a master's in chemistry. As you can see, in the third year, I did a year abroad at the University of Texas. So Lee Hyam, I think I've seen him on the call somewhere. He's managed to sort this out. So we did a year studying and working abroad in a lab in El Paso, Texas. So this is what kind of set me out from other people going forward in my career. Started my career at EY, I should say, similar to Abby at PwC. So I got a publication, I guess you can't probably see that better, publication here in the European Journal of Chemistry for some of the research that was done in Texas. And this was just one of the catalysts that we synthesized there. I guess you're not as interested in that as going forward. That's just me. So my kind of work outside the lab, my career started at EY 2017. So I did audit, same as Abby, probably the same as Alexander. Now I'm chartered, so I finished in September 2020. So I've done the 15 professional exams. I've gone through all the bloodshed that's kind of needed in there. And as part of that, I worked on some companies that you might know. You got your Thomas Cook, that was quite a big one. The other one's Amgen, similar to AstraZeneca, a big pharmaceutical company. Just getting to kind of know how these companies work from the inside that I can then use further in my career. So then coming up to 2021, I decided to join a Chinese group called Mindray. So these are similar, we've got some competitors there. We've got Philips, Siemens, GE, and Mindray are, they basically sell ventilators and medical devices. So they're quite pertinent at the minute with the pandemic going on. So I'm getting to see how they're kind of crushing the market at the minute, which hopefully will continue. So that's my background. Happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. If you're able to just stop sharing your screen, fantastic. Yeah, that's great, fantastic. So we're nearly at the Q&A. Before we move on to our questions and answers, I can see that some of you have already kind of put some questions in the chat, so that's great. We'll come back to those later on. Before we do that, I'd just like to hand over now to our final panelist. So I'll hand over to you, Alanis.
So hello, I graduated with a degree in biomedical science. And actually wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I didn't really like the practical aspect of biomed, but I loved the medical side of it. So I was kind of thinking about staying on and doing something in healthcare, like physio. But at the same time, I'd done 3 years at uni, I'd studied hard at college, and I just wasn't sure if I wanted to commit to another 2 years, 3 years post-grad. So I started having a little Google and seeing kind of what jobs were available at home, and I kind of stumbled across the Grad Scheme, and it was more the company that actually attracted me to the role. So like the company is very much focused on you as an individual, your personality. They have dogs in the office, an office bar, parties often, you get your birthday off. So it was kind of like the actual vibe of the company that attracted me, rather than actually it being finance. So I sent off my application, a bit blasé, kind of thought, see what happens, and got invited to the assessment day and got offered the job, and then was like, oh, I'm gonna work in finance. But actually it hasn't felt like that at all. So my day-to-day is helping financial advisors give good advice to their clients. So they'll send in samples of the advice that they're recommending to someone, and we'll help them with that, check if it's suitable, if that's going to be really sound advice. We also help businesses come from nothing and then get authorised with the FCA so they can become a brand new financial planning practice. So we work really closely with our firms. I'm also going through my level 4 financial planning diploma. So I'm halfway through that at the minute, which is actually, it's hard, but it's not too bad, because we have within the Verve group, there's lots of different companies. So we have the compliance, we have paraplanning, which is like writing how you give your advice to the clients, and we have the Art of Finance, which is a financial training scheme. So that training is available to all of the staff. So we have help going through our diploma. So it's not too bad. We are actually hiring at the minute if anyone's interested. But yeah, that's probably me.
That's great. Thank you, Alanis, and thank you to all of our panellists who've given their introduction. I can see that we have quite a few questions in the chat box already, so that's fantastic. So we'll try our best to get through all of these questions during the remainder of the session. So I'd just perhaps like to kick things off. I think a lot of you sort of spoke in your introductions about study. So I suppose for those of you who are perhaps in the audit roles that we were talking about, I think it might be quite useful to give our audience just a bit of an overview in terms of what is it that you actually were studying, and I think how did you balance full-time work with that part-time study? How did you manage to get through that, or balance your time currently if you're still studying at the moment? Perhaps maybe if we come to Abby, perhaps firstly, as somebody who's fairly new to this and actually currently studying at the moment.
Yeah, so I'm doing the ACA qualification, and that consists of 15 exams, which are split into certificate, professional, and I don't know
Advanced.
which one it is. Yeah, it's too far away for me to even know which one that is. So I've done my first 5 exams, and I did them in September. So I did it straight away when I joined. So they kind of ease you into it. So I did, I think, 5 weeks of study and exams. There's a really quick turnaround, so there's a lot of content to get through. But because you're just studying, I think it's very manageable if you put the work in. However, from next week, I now have to start studying for the professional exams whilst working. So I think really in a role like this, all of your managers, everyone else working has already done the qualification too. So they're really understanding. So, if I want to finish on time, I just have to say, please, can I finish on time? I need to study. I think it's going to take a lot of my weekends, a lot of my evenings, but I guess at the end of the day, it is worth it, because once I've finished, you will earn a lot of money if you do stick at it. So I guess that's what my motivation is.
Thank you, Abby. And I think it's safe to say that people's motivations are actually very different. But I think, often when you start your graduate career, you join these, big financial companies, so PwC, such as Abby, EY, such as Alex, and they train you to study. They pay for your qualification. It's a great way to learn the basics in finance if you're coming from a science background. I think just adding to that, somebody's kind of written in the chat about what did you do to prepare for a career in finance when none of you actually came from a business or a financial background? Did any of you do any work experience? So during your studies, did any of you gain any work experience relating to business and finance to help you perhaps prepare yourselves for making a graduate application? I don't know if anybody wants to go first.
I was just going to say I didn't do anything at all, because I didn't even know that I wanted a job in audit. So I think because everyone that joins, all of the people in my year, everyone above, they all came from such different backgrounds. Some people did history, some people did biology. So they're not really looking at what qualification you did, but what skills you got from your qualification. So I think you've got a pretty level playing field with whatever course you come from.
That's great, thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything to that?
Pretty much just to reinforce it, I have quite a lot of work experience, but none of it was even remotely finance related. There was an awful lot of frontline healthcare and lab work and things, but no, I had no experience of finance at all before I joined. And that almost seemed to count in my favor. We have very few people from finance backgrounds who joined the cadre that I was on. I think we had one in the Newcastle office. Everyone else was linguists, scientists, hugely diverse background.
That's great, thank you. And I think, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I could say something on it as well. So I did the ACA like Abby, but I've done all 15. So going back to that, it is quite tough, and it does take a lot of your time, your weekends, etc. But as Abby said, like your salary does kind of double nearly, so it is well worth it if you're looking for that kind of thing.
It's probably worth mentioning that different places will have different exam policies, different ways of doing your studies. So I do quite a lot of my, so I work for a public sector organisation, but we did an awful lot of study alongside private sector groups. And the impression that I got was we had to study for more exams concurrently. So they were all studying for 2 professional exams at the time, and we were doing 3. But on the other hand, we had more study leave, and there was more flexibility and more of an acceptance that we would not have to work when we were studying. So a lot of different places you will have different experiences. Either way, it'll still be horrible, but
I agree with that. Yeah. we would still have to work. And yeah, people do know that they've gone through the exams themselves, but then they kind of think back that they've done it, so you should as well. So we didn't really get much time off.
And I think while you're speaking, Alex, I think somebody's also asked, Alex, you in particular, what made you decide to go from a chemistry master's into audit at EY? Was there anything that kind of prompted that decision?
Yeah, Laura. So I guess I'd done quite a lot of work in the lab. So I'd had my year doing kind of serious research, and then the master's research as well. And I felt like I was getting into a bit of a niche. So I was working on, especially if you go, I guess, for like now, if you do a PhD, it's quite a niche area. You'll be on one specialised lab group. And I wanted to have a bigger impact, kind of worldwide-ish. So working at EY on all the big multi-FTSE companies, you get to see all this. You get to see all the different companies, how they work, and I feel like I'm having a bigger impact than I would have done in the lab. And I get to switch my lab coat and glasses for a suit and tie, which is quite nice.
You enjoy the suit and tie life, Alex?
I am, yeah. I think I made the right choice. But
good stuff. And I think, it's apparent from this conversation that actually, many of you, if not all of you, weren't exactly planning on going into a business and finance role while you were still studying. And it's also apparent that not that many of you had that, very, very specific business finance related experience when you were studying. So thinking about when you came to that process of making applications, what skills do you think you gained from your science qualification that you think actually helped you during the application process? And, what skills do you think you have as a science graduate that perhaps you think sets you apart from, students who've maybe studied business, languages, etc.? So what makes you different, and what makes you really stand out, do you think, during the application process? If I could maybe come to Alanis perhaps first.
Yeah, so I actually, to go from biomed to where I am, I think the skills I gained from my degree massively was things like being able to get really nitty gritty with numbers and data. Obviously, being in the lab, that's something that you do without even realizing, and it is just a transferable skill. Like, it's just being able to understand where numbers are coming from and how to interpret them, which is just, yeah, it's universal. And then also things just in the wider context of uni. So, like, you've been independent, you've lived alone, you've shown that you can get up and you can go and you can study, you can pass your exams, you committed, you do group work, you can do independent study. There's just so many things in general from a uni experience that is so valuable when applying. It doesn't just have to come from purely just doing a scientific study. Yeah, it can be anything really.
That's great, thank you. Would anyone else like to add to this?
I was just going to say that, of course, with chemistry, it's really analytical. You've got to think really logically, and you definitely have to do that when you do an audit as well. But I would say, especially with things like audit, it's really, I would say, about your personality. I think especially with PwC, it's quite social, and they really go off like the culture. That's like what stands out for PwC. Well, that's what I could tell you. So I just think, you know, you need to be that like social person. You have to be able to talk to lots of different clients. You know, in the lab, you're working with lab partners. You've got to work with lots of different people. I guess for our degree for chemistry, you do get to know all of the people in chemistry because you have to work with everyone in the labs. So I think communication is key for audit, and you get that obviously from being in the lab too.
I would add to that, you don't have to be an extrovert to work in audit. I am so far down the introvert scale that yeah, they sent me out of the room when they were working out where everyone sat on that scale. But even so, just the general interpersonal skills that you pick up being at university, ideally being in a society or two, it makes a lot of difference. Again, particularly in audit, because that is a job where even as a first year trainee, you might find yourself telling somebody who's been doing an accountancy job for 20 years that they're doing something wrong. And, you know, that's can be quite daunting if you're not used to talking to people in a mature and adult setting, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing I would add from a PhD perspective, I think I saw a question before where somebody said, you know, if you've gone that far down the road, are you sort of putting off employers from? I would say for a PhD, from my experience, no, and there is a bit of stigma you've got to get over. I remember one of the interviews I had for one of the temporary position before I had my first position was the guy said, you know, the hiring manager, oh, great, I can at least talk to you. You've got some communication skill, because I think some stigma is, you know, if they've spent a lot of time in the lab, you might not be that great in terms of communicating, and something that Abby touched upon. But, you know, certainly in a science degree, it's very important, you know, because it's that understanding and that you have, you know, and the reliability that you give, especially when you're sitting in front of customers in my position, and you're sort of you know, explaining something or trying to get them convinced to do something. It really does help, and the communication side, you know, communication skills that you gain, sort of softer skills, if you like, are just as important as the hardcore skills that you gain.
That's great, thanks, Hamid. I suppose while we're on the subject, Hamid, obviously you joined VOLAC with a PhD qualification.
Yeah.
You know, I'd be interested to know a little bit about, you know, the role that you initially applied to. Was it a prerequisite that you needed a PhD? And I suppose to add to that, what kinds of opportunities are there within your organisation for students and graduates that don't hold a PhD qualification, that, you know, perhaps, you know, searching for opportunities, you know, with an undergraduate or a master's degree without that PhD qualification?
Yes, the first question in terms of PhD requirement, it wasn't a prerequisite, but you know, given that there's quite a number of senior managers here who have PhD roles, it's helped, and what it appealed to them was that depth side of things. So you know, because we do a lot of you know, if there's a customer issue, really need to dig in deep. So it certainly did help, but it was by no means, you know, it wasn't a something that you needed to have. It's just, you know, I think should not underestimate the impression that you give in an interview, because it's not a, you know, 1 or 2 hour interview. It's a sort of a drawn out process, and at least a couple of interviews you have to give presentation, you know, so you give Q&As. So that side of it is certainly very important in terms of, you know, opportunities for within VOLAC. So there you know, there are opportunities. There were much more opportunities before COVID-19, if you like, but because of you know, the situation we have now, it's a lot of people working remotely. It's at the moment they don't have a lot of opportunity, but the sort of opportunities you have is you know, in the finance team, There's other divisions within the company, sort of the animal nutrition side of things. Again, they, one of my colleagues here, so she's done a degree in biology. So I'm a chemist. My line manager, she did food science. One of my other colleagues, she did a chemistry, but then she did a food science degree on top of it. One other colleague didn't do any of that. So so it's it's a number of things that count. But I would say in terms of finding opportunities here at Volate, it's really sometimes key just to do. Don't just look at the website. Sometimes send speculative email to the right people, and I'll be more than happy to help people there. Sometimes things come about. I mean, one of the positions that I obtained sort of was, I just, when I applied, the agency said that the job description came in front of him a day before that. So sometimes, don't underestimate that aspect of it.
Thank you. Somebody has asked a really good question, asking if careers in audit or finance related roles, would you say that you have a good work-life balance? Now, a lot of you have talked about the impact of having to study and work full time, and I suppose generally in hindsight, would you say that your work-life balance is pretty good?
Want me to start?
Oh, sorry.
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay, so this is possibly one where Abby and I can have a huge argument. So the impression that I always got, and certainly that I was always told, was that work-life balance working in the public sector was better than for those working in the private sector. And certainly all of my course mates who were working in the private sector always looked a lot more tired than I felt. And I can't really talk about the private sector. I haven't worked there. That's rabid to say, but I certainly can't complain too much at all about the work-life balance in my current employment. We work 9 to 5, or at least it was 9 to 5. Now it's whenever you feel like. That's completely official, except during our busiest season where you work, an extra 2 hours a week, and if you work any more than that, you get time back off in lieu. I certainly, my employer at least, can't complain about work-life balance at all. There was very little in the way of compulsory overtime or even compulsory social activities. Even before COVID-19 happened, flexible working and working from home was becoming increasingly popular. After COVID-19 happened, pretty much on the first day lockdown was instituted, an email went round from the Comptroller and Auditor General saying, we understand that some of you have children to look after and may not be able to work sometimes or at all during this pandemic. That's okay. Here's a job code. We'll just keep on paying you even if you don't do any work at all this year. So when it comes to work-life balance and generally being looked after by your employer, I can't complain at all about the NAO.
That's great. That's really encouraging to hear. I suppose, Abby and perhaps Alex, from your experience at EY, I'm thinking in particular, tell us a bit about your experiences and how the work-life balance has been. And please be honest. This is an open forum.
I mean, I can't quite say that what I've experienced so far is anything as good as that sounds. I mean,
I'm happy to explain the downside as well afterwards. Don't worry. I provide balance. But
I've only really worked properly during the busy season, which is January to March, because I was in college prior to that. In February alone, I did 90 hours of overtime. It is really hard work. Would I say I have a good work-life balance right now? Probably not, no. But having said that, we do a lot of social things. I think I'm the only one out of all the first year graduates that has worked that many hours, but I think it's because I've been put on a London job. So, if you work in a London audit firm, then you are tended to work more hours than someone up north. So I think I just got, I was just a bit unlucky. Would I say I've got work-life balance? No, probably not, to be honest, but it will get better after busy season, but not right now.
I'm not sure it will get better after
I was going to say, I've heard that before.
I should probably tell you, I was working in the Cambridge office, so about an hour from London. So we got quite a lot of London clients as well. The usual is probably 8 till 6 maybe, but I mean, on a good day. When we were working on Thomas Cook, reporting for the group, we'd be there at 12, 1 in the morning in Peterborough and driving back an hour to get up at 6 to drive back. It can be quite rough, but the audit timelines and deadlines, if you're on a client that has to report on a certain day, then you have to work that. Hopefully the next client you roll onto hasn't got a deadline for a while and you can relax a bit. It's kind of in peaks and troughs. Now, after I've kind of moved on from audit, now I'm a European financial accountant. I'm doing more 8 till 4, and it actually is 8 till 4. And it's well worth the hard work and effort for your 3 years to qualify. And if you want to go further, you can, but quite a lot of people ship out after the qualification for obvious reasons.
I was going to say, like, I mean, it is a lot of hard work, but what you find is that everyone doesn't actually stay in audit. You know, you could go into lots of different streams. You know, you could go into consulting, tax, you could go and be an accountant for like any company. There's so many options after that. Like, I feel like that's a massive reason as to why you put in all that hard work. It's
a great foundation to kind of build your career. Once you've got that, and you've got like another master's, and anyone will take you on. If you've got PwC, EY, NAO on your CV, anyone will take you.
As soon as you put the word ACA on your LinkedIn profile, you start getting headhunted, and it's actually quite annoying. But it's a good thing to be annoyed about. Yeah, I said I'd provide some balance. The trade-off that we're normally told is that in the public sector, opportunities for promotion and career progression are very limited. So we promote maybe one person from my grade per year in the Newcastle office, and maybe 20 in the London office, and that's it. Whereas, and we only have about 4 grades between where I am and the Comptroller and Auditor General. Whereas, as I understand it, in the private sector, you have quite a lot more in the way of career progression, promotion opportunities for people who do work hard and want to push for that sort of career style.
Thank you. We've still got quite a few questions in the chat box, so we'll keep going if everybody's sort of happy to continue. I suppose reading through the chat, I think students are quite pleasantly surprised actually to hear that many of you didn't have a huge amount of prior work experience related to sort of business and finance. Looking back retrospectively, what advice would you give to current students to help them, if they're thinking about going for roles in business and finance after they've finished? What type of experience would you recommend they perhaps look into getting, beyond just perhaps a more kind of corporate internship program? Is there anything that students can be doing to perhaps gain experience and find out more about the industry while they're still studying? Perhaps, yeah.
What Elizabeth said about really you needed to have completed a placement or an internship, and I wouldn't like actually agree with that. I think me and one other person, if that, and were the only 2 people in my year that didn't do an internship or a placement. So if you can get a placement or an internship, I would definitely recommend doing that, because a lot of the time they do actually offer you then a graduate role. I actually applied for the Leeds office, but when I went for my final interview, someone beat me by 1 mark, but because I still passed the interview overall, I managed to get into Newcastle. But I do think that's quite rare. If you haven't got a placement in an internship, I'd recommend, like for PwC personally, applying to say like Leeds or like Manchester, a bigger office, because Newcastle is a really small office. I think it's the smallest in the UK, so it's quite difficult to get into Newcastle, I would say.
Yeah, so being strategic in terms of where you decide to apply for opportunities as well might also help. What about other things? So besides internships, beside placements, is there other work experience that you think would be useful for students to look into if they're thinking about going for business and finance roles? Perhaps Alanis and Hamid, if you wouldn't mind jumping in.
Yeah. Sorry, Alanis. Before my first position, while I was still sort of, searching what to do, I did, if you like, a temporary position, sort of a short executive project for a engineering company, and that was in the field where I ended up getting my first job. So water chemistry, that definitely helps. It sort of stood me out from all the applicants, and my employer, what they liked was that I had familiarity in the field. But what I would say with those is, just sort of, it was quite tough, so just to sort of do your sort of research in terms of when doing these temporary petitioning company, because there are certain deadlines to hit, and you're new, and you've got a limited amount of time. But certainly, sometimes doing temporary position, after you've finished your thesis, and before, when you're not sure, does certainly help in terms of landing a position.
Yeah, thank you. Alanis, have you got anything to add in terms of sort of experience that the students could perhaps gain in this field?
Yeah, so the financial advice sector is a little bit different. You can't actually go to be a financial advisor or anything like that without getting your level 4 diploma. So everyone kind of has to study. There's not like you can just get a degree and go and do it. But the only thing I would kind of suggest is maybe go and approach your, if there's any local financial advice firms, and they might be able to do something for a day. But for me, I didn't do anything, and there's nothing that I would really recommend doing. I think it kind of depends on the firm that you want to apply for. There is a gap in the market at the minute for younger financial advisors. So because a lot of them are like older men in suits, there is a big gap in the market at the minute. So I think a lot of firms are generally going towards being more personable and kind of focusing on what your personality is like rather than what experience you have specifically in that industry.
Thank you.
Could I just add a point, Helen?
Yeah, of course, go for it.
I would say apply for anything that is kind of where you want to be. I think if you get some experience in customer facing before, I think I did some work as kind of bar work, restaurant work, anything that's customer facing for the communication that Alexander talked about before. But what really, for me, I applied for a lot of positions, PwC, KPMG, everywhere. But I think I got about 50 rejections. So
yep,
I mean,
same here.
just obviously tailor your applications, but get them out. And then if you get rejected, don't just move on to the next one, and you'll get one. You will.
Yeah, it took me 18 months from when I started applying to eventually getting one. My application style didn't actually change a great deal. It just was a case of belligerence, pretty much. The main piece of advice that I would give are get a job. Doesn't matter what job, but it helps you answer this style of question that you come to hate applying for these things, which is tell me about a time when, usually followed by you demonstrated one of the values that we want for this role. And doing any sort of paid work gives you the experience to answer those. Yes, if you have experience in student committees, student volunteering associations, whatever, those help, and they help kind of break up the monotony in your answers a bit. Yeah, do something, get involved in something. It almost doesn't matter what. Again, my experience differs a bit from everybody else's. There are only, I think, 8 internships available for my organization. So, and we take 80 to 100 people a year. So most people haven't done any sort of work with this beforehand. But in terms of tailoring your application, the one piece of research that I did said that the NAO has a really savage maths test in the first part of the application process, which it turns out we fail 95% of applicants on. I'm not very good at maths, but I spent a long time before that doing a whole load of mental arithmetic planning. And that paid off.
Just one thing I would add, Helen, from just a tip about CVs, something I had over the years is don't just list things you've done. You really got to sell it. Even if it's something you think it's minor, talk about what you've achieved in there. So don't just say, when I was at university, I completed a project and this, give a bit more, detail. So the project involved these aspects, and I, completed it within deadline or, within budget. And you focus throughout of it on your CV, focus on achievement as opposed to just a list of things that you've done. That would help, your CV stand out.
Absolutely, and I think for students that maybe haven't used the career service or maybe aren't fully aware of the range of support that we provide as well, and there's loads that we can help you at every stage in the application process. So often, particularly with larger financial companies, you might tend to find that there are multiple stages in the application process, from an initial CV application to numerical reasoning tests, to a video interview, to an assessment centre, etc. We're here to help you at every stage and give you feedback on your drafts. So if you are applying for things, just remember that that support is there, and that support is available to you as well for up to 3 years after you graduate. So now that we're an online careers service this year, no matter where you are in the world, you can request that support and you can get that one-to-one video support. So I would recommend also doing that when you're making applications, to make sure that they're as strong as they can be. So we're coming towards the end of the session now. I've got a couple of quick, yes, Alexander, did you just want to add something there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'd completely forgotten that I did use that service 2 years after I graduated, and it was very helpful. So please do that.
That's good to know. Good endorsement right there. So we got a couple of questions in the chat that I'd just like to get to before we wrap up. So the first question, Ruben, I think it was, is asking about newsletters, and are there any newsletters in the field of finance, business, or entrepreneurship that you would recommend? But I suppose in extension to that, perhaps, are there any kind of other sources that you use when you were trying to find opportunities, in terms of publications, but also I think things like websites, LinkedIn, that kind of thing? So where would you recommend students look and search for opportunities in this area?
I'll just jump straight in. If anyone wants to go to the Grad Scheme, you can have a look on there, and it kind of explains the roles available. And I think the deadline is the 2nd of April for our applications. So yeah, send them in. Send them in
and get them checked by the career service before as well. Is there anyone else, any other sources that you'd recommend, or websites, useful resources to help search and find opportunities in your area?
I mean, I'm sure everybody knows this already, but I find making good use of LinkedIn is it's key now. And just don't put all your eggs in one basket. Speak to agents, LinkedIn, sometimes speculative CV writing. We had a student from Newcastle who lived close to where I work, so he visited us, in fact, very nice. So I passed his CV on to our HR department. So yeah, so just doing a number of things, but I find that LinkedIn is becoming more and more popular now.
I would also say make use of Glassdoor, not so much for finding opportunities in your area, but background checking the opportunities that you have found. There are horror stories on there. They're worth paying attention to. There are several companies in Newcastle that are deeply unscrupulous in how they recruit graduates, and they're best avoided. Not financial companies, I hate to say. But
I would say like LinkedIn as well. I mean, that's how I got the basis of PwC. I reached out to someone that someone else knew who I knew. And she really inspired me to apply to PwC. So I would definitely say LinkedIn. But I would also bear in mind that this was the one question that I got asked on my interview that I wasn't sure what the answer was. So really make sure you know why you want to do finance and what you looked on to realise, actually, yeah, this is what I want to do. How did you find that company? Because I'm sure you would get asked that in many other interviews as well.
Yeah, great point, Abby. So do your research. If you're applying for roles in this area, just make sure that you're using a range of different sources as well when you're searching for opportunities. And I'd just perhaps like to end with a really interesting question from Laura, who's a PhD student, quite concerned about a potential career in academia due to the fact that job security isn't always great. There are a lot of fixed term contracts, etc. So Laura's interested to know about how you feel job security is in your own area of work. So great question.
Yeah, if I can just jump right in. So it's when you move to any job, there's that probationary period, 3 months, 6 months, sometimes even a year. But from my experience, what I've found after that, you get a sort of a permanent contract, and that is a permanent sense that obviously there's no time limit. But I think if you put the efforts in any company, if you sort of meet your KPIs, you go beyond that, you build relationships with people, I think you solve your issues within the company, make yourself indispensable. So then it'll be it's very unlikely they'll just get rid of you. So it is better than much better than academia, I would say.
Thanks, Hammond. I think that's really useful advice from somebody who's been through the PhD experience as well, who probably is, really understanding of Laura's situation and sometimes the challenges of being able to secure, permanent contracts within academia, at least initially.
Yeah. It's become more and more difficult now as well because of the changes in university structures. But yeah.
That's fantastic. So I think we're more or less out of time there now. So before I just wrap up, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our 5 panelists this afternoon. So thank you for being honest. Thank you for sharing our experiences. As you can see, we've had some really lively conversation in the chat box, which I think is really sort of highlights the interest that our students and our graduates have in this area. So for students who joined us this afternoon, we really hope that you found this insight useful and giving you a lot more information about finding roles in business and finance as a science student or graduate. Before we finish, just a couple of things just to sort of remind you of. So for students, if you'd like further support, so you can find out lots and lots of information about science careers outside the labs, different types of roles available, where to gain experience, where to find opportunities in these different fields on the Careers Service website here. Equally, this is just one of a whole host of sessions taking place throughout the week. So we've got a number of different science careers outside the lab panel sessions, so they're all themed, taking place between tomorrow and Thursday afternoon. And finally, as I sort of said, if you'd like support from the Career Service, if you'd like help finding vacancies, but equally if you'd like one-to-one feedback on applications, please do log into My Career and you can request that support from us. Before we finish, we just wanted to run a really quick poll just to kind of get a little feedback from you about if this session has really helped aid your understanding about the range of non-lab based roles for students in this area. So if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit of feedback, we'd really appreciate that. I'll leave the poll running for a couple more, for another minute or so.
Just while the poll's running, I think probably worth mentioning one more thing that my fellow ACA students may agree with, simply because job security is mentioned. Once you've done the ACA, you're pretty much indestructible job-wise. Not least of all because this is the part they don't tell anyone about for some strange reason. You gain lifetime membership of the Chartered Accountants Benevolent Association, which will act as a job agency for you if you ever lose your job and support your income if you ever lose your job, which is a worst case scenario in the first place. So yeah, hard to imagine better job security, to be honest.
Thank you. So that's the end of the session, everyone. Thank you for providing your feedback. And once again, huge thank you to all of our panelists that have taken the time to speak to us this afternoon. So we hope that you found that useful feel free to log off now, students. You'll see there's a couple of sort of comments in the chat box, just the link that Alanis mentioned about the Grad Scheme website as well, if anyone was interested in having a look at that in a little bit more detail as well. So thanks everyone. If I could just maybe ask our speakers just to hang around for another minute or so once all of our students have gone, that'd be great.